Welcome to part 9 of this Sylenth Masterclass video tutorial. This will be the final part in this tutorial course, and we are going to be finishing up the effects section, looking at the coarse, EQ, delay, reverb, and compression within Sylenth. So coarse is kind of harkening back to a course of, think of singers. It's basically going to try to make a monophonic sound or one sound source sound like there's multiple parts making up that sound. And that is what Sylenth's course tries to do. So if I turn it on and play this progression that we've been looking at, so you can hear it's definitely thickening things up, and I can pull up that multimeter and we can see what it's doing on the goniometer, or however you pronounce that word. This is making it a little bit thicker in the stereo field. So the output of Sylenth's course is basically, it's a mix between the input signal and a delayed copy of it. And the delay time can be modulated by this LFO rate that you see right here. So the delay is in milliseconds. So the first knob that you get is that delay, and that's going to determine how much of a delay between the dry signal and wet signal you hear. At very high times of 40 milliseconds, it's essentially just a slapback delay. You know, like that kind of delay they'll put on country guitars, and it kind of has that like slap feel where it's very, very quick. So that is kind of how you can control if you just want to kind of thicken things up a little. You're not going to boost the delay too much, because too much of a delay signal is going to kill the attack of your sound as well. Next you get this rate knob, and the rate is basically the frequency at which you're going to be modulating with this depth. So the depth knob, and there's going to be a picture flashing. The depth parameter is going to adjust the sweep depth of a delayed sound. So think of your amplitude from, like you can see on the picture, from the base to the top of your amplitude of your peaks and dips. That's what the depth is affecting. So let's play around with that. So I'm going to turn the delay back to around halfway. So you can hear that the depth, it's almost like kind of like a crazy type of pitch bend going on. And too much of really any of the chorus or phasing effect is going to be unusable in a mix. So these are things that you use to kind of subtly make your sounds thicker and bigger. And then you have this little dual mode here. And the dual mode is going to essentially turn on two instances of the chorus. So here it is with one. So it's kind of running through its staging processes 2 times as opposed to just once. And then going down, you get this feedback knob. And the feedback knob sets the amount of feedback that you're going to hear of the delayed wet signal. So if I turn this up to 100%, so you can actually create flanger type sounds in Sylenth using this chorus effect. So if you set the delay to about 1 to 5 milliseconds, let's do 3, and then add some feedback to it, you now kind of get that classic flanger effect. So it's a very capable coursing module for a synthesizer. And let's go to this width knob real quick. And the width knob in all of the effects that have them are going to be doing a similar thing. The width knob is going to affect the stereo width of the coursing effect. And you can set it from 0 to 100. So 0 is going to be more of a monophonic width. If you have headphones on, you'll especially be able to hear that difference. It really spreads it out. And then of course this dry wet is going to determine how much of the dry signal you hear and how much of the wet signal you hear. So at 0, it's going to be all dry signal. It's going to be like having the chorus off. And at halfway, you're going to hear half dry signal, half wet, and of course 100%. just wet, and you'd typically never use the dry and wet all the way up at 100 unless you have your feedback rate, depth, delay, and width all very, very, very low. So let's go down to the equalizer in Sylenth. Now, the equalizer in Sylenth is, I don't know if I would look at it as a way that I use to actually carve out frequencies in my sounds. So this is a little bit off topic, but why not? If I pull up an EQ here and I turn on an analyzer, there's not a lot of bass in this sound, but there's a little content going there. And I don't want any of that, right? So I'm going to turn on and cut all that out. And I don't want any of that because this is a lead, and if I had a bass playing and a kick, that's going to be occupying those frequencies. So I just want to cut out all those frequencies. It's kind of like painting and blending different colors. So that being said, the EQ in Sylenth, I typically never use to cut frequencies. I'll do that outside of Sylenth. I typically use it to actually change the sound and make the sound how it needs to sound. Because the equalizer has subtle effects to begin with, and it's only gonna ever make some really simple adjustments to the sound, and it's only going to affect, you only have the option of bass basically and treble. So let's look at some of these knobs and some of the options you got. This bass knob is in a dB, a decibel function, and the bass and treble knob are both set to, if they're both set to 0, the sound's not going to have any difference. So if you boost this up to dB, it's going to be telling Sylenth to boost this bass frequency that you set by that dB level. So we can hear that. And this bass frequency is, of course, in hertz. And the really cool thing about Sylenth's EQ is that it does have an internal, I guess, normalizer or kind of a limiter going on. So when you boost this bass by 14 dB, my sound didn't go up by 14 dB. So that's got some voodoo magic going on behind the scenes. And then you have the frequency knob for both the treble and bass, which is going to determine the frequency that's being changed for the treble and the bass. And then you have the same set of knobs for the treble. And let's boost some of those. So I'm going to boost it by 15 dB, play the sound. So you can see that even the changes, they aren't going to do a whole lot. And then you have this option of 1 pole or 2 pole. And so that is essentially all you get in the EQ. It's something that you can definitely use to shape some sounds, but it's not something that I use to really warm up anything or to even cut frequencies. So now let's look at this delay module inside of Sylenth, which is another really deep effect, and it has some really cool features to it. If I pull up the delay that's set in Logic, like the stock delay, stereo delay in Logic, you'll see some similarities. You have delay left, delay right, left, right, low cut, high cut, low cut, high cut. You get basically feedback right here and here, and then you get, of course, dry and wet. So there's some things though in Sylenth's delay that you don't have in many other delays, which make it a very useful effect. And I've had this on the whole time you've been listening to the sound. So let's go through some of these knobs here real quick. So first you have the delay left and delay right, and those are going to be presented to you in note values, ranging from 1/64th notes to 1/2 notes. So half notes. And you can really create some cool effects, and you can kind of spread, you can have one, they're independent from each other, which is always helpful. And then you get this low cut and this high cut. Now the low cut and the high cut is going to affect just the echoes or the delay signal of the sound. It's not going to affect the dry signal. And what it's going to do is it's going to either filter out the high or low frequencies at each delay depending on your settings. So that's really useful when you're in actually a production environment and you're using a sound in a mix. You typically don't want to have too many low frequencies jumping around, or for that matter, too many high frequencies depending on the sound. So if you have a bass, you're going to cut some of the high cut. And if you have a lead, you're going to cut some of the, if you have a lead sound, you're going to want to cut out some of those low frequencies, and those are two knobs that allow you to do that within Sylenth delay. Now next is this ping pong box, and this is pretty cool. So there are two delay modes essentially, normal and ping pong. In normal mode, the left and right channels have independent delays, as we talked about with the delay left and right. But in ping pong mode, the sound jumps from left to right and back using the delay times that you set up by the delay left and delay right knobs. So ping pong is kind of that classic delay sound that we hear a lot, and it's one of my favorite features of Sylenth delay. So I'm gonna make these quarter notes so we can kind of hear this panning out a little bit. So I just changed some of the settings that I had to kind of, this is not what I would use in a mix, but I'm just doing it so you can kind of hear what's going on clear. So that ping pong, here's the difference. So you can hear that it'd be way too much without the ping pong on. So let's keep going with the ping pong on because we're going to talk about these next two knobs here. Next you're going to see is this smear knob, and this is really cool. So I guess the best way to explain this would be if you went to a really big room or a warehouse and you clapped or you said like, hey, 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 and it had those reverb, kind of echoes, the reverb and the echo is playing out. Or even when like cartoons or something make fun of that and you hear like, hey, 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 hey. You can see how the reason why they'll make the first hey louder and the next hey is quieter is because the energy of the sound waves start to lose their energy as they spread out over time. So digital reverbs and delays don't usually accommodate for that unless it's convolution reverb. Basically, the smear knob is trying to act as like a convolution control, whereas if you boost this knob, the energy in the delay left and delay right, whether it's ping-ponged or not, is going to lose energy and get quieter as the feedback progresses. So if I turn up the feedback here, so see how it's kind of muddy now? Boost the smear. It's not as muddy. And that's because behind the scenes in Sylenth, it's kind of trying to simulate the effect of real sounding echoes in a real world space. So that's really cool because not all delay modules have that. Then next you have this spread knob. And the spread knob won't do anything unless you're in the ping pong mode. So what it's doing is it's spreading out the width, the stereo field of just the ping pong delay. So down at 0, it's kind of, it's not mono, but it's not as far out in the stereo field. And then you have this feedback, which is going to, most delays will have this feedback knob, and the feedback knob will control the speed with which the delays will fade away technically. So if you have more feedback, there's going to be more of a pronounced effect. So sometimes having the feedback and the delay of the echoes, having it out too wide can actually make the sound too muddy or lose focus and clarity in a mix. So you can create, if you pull this down to 0, it goes from 0 to 100%, as do most of these knobs, except for the delay left and delay right and low cuts do. You can kind of have it more in a mono setting, so you can kind of make it more of a focus point of the sound. And then last, of course, you have the dry wet, which is going to determine how much dry signal passes through the output or how much wet signal passes through the final output. So let's go on to the reverb. The reverb in Sylenth is pretty good. It's kind of digital sounding, but it has some general controls that you've probably all seen in most DAWs or most reverbs. You have size, pre-delay, width, damp, dry, and wet. The size is going to go from 0 to 10. The pre-delay is in milliseconds. So the size is going to tell Sylenth and the algorithm behind the reverb how big of room or space to model this reverb off of. And the pre-delay is going to tell Sylenth, in milliseconds, how many milliseconds must pass before you hear the reverb signal. So that's really useful. There's actually a site called Music Calculator. Check it out if you don't know what it is. You can actually create, like, at 128 BPM, like a standard EDM tempo. I think it's around 117 milliseconds is actually like a note value. Don't quote me on this, but I think it's maybe an eighth note. Anyway, I use that all the time. I haven't committed them to memory because I just cheat and use the tool. But you can actually find out in milliseconds what correlates to your tempo. So your pre-delays are actually rhythmic. So it really can help tighten up a mix. Then next you have this width knob. And the width knob sets the stereo width of the reverb effect. Setting it to 0 kind of makes it sound more mono, while setting it up all the way to 10 really spreads out the reverb. So I just boosted the dry wet up to 100% so you can hear that. And then you have the damp. And the damp's kind of cool because I don't know why reverb plugins took on this damp, but basically damp in most reverb plugins stands for the brightness or darkness of the reverbed signal. I don't know why it wasn't called something like EQ or bright or dark, but that's neither here nor there. So the damp, if you have the damp all the way down, your reverb is going to sound darker. And then if you turn it up all the way to 10, it's going to attenuate the higher frequencies. And then finally you have the dry wet, which is of course controlling the amount of dry signal coming through the output of the reverb and the wet signal coming through the output. So at 0, you're not going to hear an effect. At about halfway, you're going to hear half dry signal, half wet signal, which is typically where I'll set it for most sounds. And then you have the, if you push it up to 100, it's that weird sound that you get. That's just all reverb signal. And last but not least, you have the compression inside of Sylenth. So this compression can be used to really tame some like unruly basses and leads that are really, really loud. It can also kind of accentuate those softer sounds just by controlling and kind of keeping the volume all consistent for like pads and atmospheres and things like that. So the first thing you'll see is this ratio knob, which is consistent to all compressors. And I'm not going to go through that because that would be a whole tutorial on its own. But you get pretty normal ratios from 1 to 1 to 100 to 1, which is going to be more in that limiter range. And that's going to be really, really squashing it. I believe if you get over 20 actually on any ratio and any compression or any compressor, it hits that limiter world. The attack and threshold are pretty common to most compressors. The threshold knob sets the minimum amplitude at which the level above the compressor starts working. So if you set it to 15 dB, your sound has to go above 15 dB before it starts to turn down any sound at the ratio you set. So if you set it from 1 to 1 to 1, it has to go to 15 dB, and then once it goes over that, the ratio will say, hey, I'm going to take that sound down by 1 to 1. The attack is going to be how quickly it's going to determine how fast the compressor responds to change in input level. So a really slow attack is going to kind of have like an optical compressor feel, and a fast attack is going to be a little bit more like a digital compressor that we all have in DAWs and stuff like that. And finally, the release. If the input never drops below what you set for your threshold level, the compressor will take some time to generally increase the gain back up to what it should be. A short time usually will elapse doing that, and you can affect that with this release knob and determine how many milliseconds pass before that process occurs. So that sums up the compression and everything that you get in that little box, and that actually finishes this masterclass on every knob, slider, button, everything in Sylenth. All right, and that sums up this Sylenth Masterclass video tutorial. You guys hung in there through 9 parts and over 2 hours of information, but you should all be pretty comfortable navigating your way around Sylenth. I thank you for watching, and I thank you for purchasing. Have a great day.